As you remember, Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount to his followers, his disciples, he said, "You are light of the world and salt of the earth." Do you remember that? And so he called them to learn about himself. A disciple means learner. And then he wants them to follow him in what he says and what he does. And then he sent them out as apostles. So they actually were becoming lights and salt right away, pretty quickly. So when you get saved, you start becoming light and salt. By the way, I just received a wonderful, wonderful gift from a dear sister in the Lord. And is this cool or what? Do you see that it's a light bulb? Can you see that? And also that's actual salt in there. So both of them together, you're light and salt. When you're following Christ, you're light and salt to the world and to the earth. And so these guys are sent out as apostles. And as a quick review, if you remember, he said, don't go to the way of the Gentiles. Stay towards and focusing on towards Jewish believers and the Galileans. So if you remember, if I draw that map right here of Israel, and then this is Galilee here, and then here's the Lake of Galilee, the Sea of Galilee, and then here's this area. He said, don't go into the way of the Gentiles up here in the Gentile areas. And also he said, don't go over in the Gentile here, Decapolis. And he said, don't go to the villages of Samaria yet. That comes later. And so he wanted them to really work on the Jews first, the Galilean Jews. He didn't even send them down to like the Judean Jews. There's Judean Jews down here. He said, no, not now. So not yet. But why is that again? I just kind of want to keep adding on to the truth here and to these teachings to help more understanding and sometimes clarity. Remember I said first, he wanted them to go to first the Jews, the Jewish people. Well, I wanted to kind of say this. I thought about it after the last video. And if you were saved, when a person gets saved, you want to first go to the people that are closest to you, to loved ones, because you want them to get saved too. And who would that be? Well, first you kind of want to go to your family, right? And then you try and get them to get the Lord. And then next in order would be friends. And then your acquaintances, for those of you younger ones who don't know what that means. I hope I'm spelling that right. I don't think that's exactly right. Probably acquaintance, something anyway. And then on out. So you kind of start here and then you go here and then you go here and you go here and then you want to share it with the whole world. But I think that's one reason God wanted to give them an opportunity. Second of all, if God had sent Jesus and the disciples to all the Gentiles first, like the Jewish people were his called people, although he had lots of Gentiles that came to become in the Jewish religion and they got saved. But if God skipped over them and said, go to the Gentiles, it's like, wow, that's like skipping over your family or something. Another thing about that, by the way, is the Jews later, not all of them, a lot of the Jewish people, they refused Jesus. They didn't believe in him. They didn't believe he was the Messiah. And so Paul said, when later, we'll get into those later, he said, you guys refuse, well, I'm going to go out now to the nations of the world, to the Gentiles. It was first right and fitting for us to go to you Jews. But because you refuse, not all of them, but leadership especially tended to, a lot of them, he said, I'm going to go out. That provoked them to jealousy. It's like, wait, he's going out with that message to them. So any which way you can get people saved. Another thought that I would like to offer here is, and then we'll be finished with that. Maybe I might have some more in the future. Why Jewish people first? Because, I'll put this question mark, why the Jewish people first? Jewish people, some of them, a lot of them, and maybe some of the apostles themselves were probably kind of prejudiced against the Gentiles. They thought they were below them or something because we're the chosen ones. I mean, I don't know. You can't say what was in the hearts of each of these individuals, but there definitely was a tendency of the Jewish people to think that we're hot, we're all that. There's a pride that kind of rose up in many of the hearts. Maybe some of the apostles had that. I'm not sure. And when you become a Christian in the beginning, you're a new baby in Christ. You have to grow. And so Jesus may have recognized it. Definitely the Samaritans, you have the Gentiles, and then we'll talk about the Samaritans, who they really were later, as I said in the last video. Samaritans, these guys were like, there's prejudice against them. They didn't like that sort of group. So maybe Jesus was, maybe part of this could have been like, all right, they're there. It's gonna take me time to show the love of God and how we love everyone and all that. So he said, well, just go to the Jews, make it easier in the beginning. Later, he called them the Samaritans. You'll see that. He actually says go there. But maybe they weren't ready for it. And there's things like that, by the way, throughout the Bible. Like a lot of people, just a quick word about this, and maybe you younger ones don't know this at all, but I think it's okay for you to understand this and get prepared, because there's slavery, for example, in the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament. And God really doesn't want slavery. There's certain forms of servanthood and employment that's okay, but some slavery is. And a lot of, in the Old Testament times, and the other nations treated their slaves like dirt. It was horrible. But God said, well, you guys are going to have servants and slaves and all. This is how you're going to treat them. And he started raising them up, like showing the worth and value. But ultimately, God didn't want slavery. And it changed in a progression over the Old Testament to the New Testament. The New Testament, it goes to, I can't wait to get to Philemon or Philemon. That book, wow, that's a great story, and how Jesus Christ and his gospel is setting even the slaves free and make them an equal. The Bible says that in Galatians 3:28, and it's all sorts of incredible, wonderful stuff. But since they're at a low point, he wants to bring them up higher, and so slaves were mistreated. So he wants, if he said just change it right away, they weren't ready for that, I'm going to reject that. God's very patient with people, like inch by inch, little by little. God over time changes lives. Like he didn't show me all the stuff that he shows me now when I first became a Christian, because I'm a baby Christian. You don't tell a little baby, okay, you ready to drive the car, son? They're not ready. So he prepares them. So God is very gracious. So also women is a whole nother thing here. Jesus Christ and his gospel is actually, we'll see that as we go, and how he treated women really sets people free. And it's still working today in some of the countries they're behind, but God's patient and he's working in them. And he wants to set free slaves and set free women and other people in our world. So it's kind of a progressive type thing. It's just not all at once. So maybe that's why he said, don't go to Gentiles, because they weren't ready for it. Maybe some of those guys had a bit of prejudice in a minute. All right, with that all in mind, I have a ton to share with you. I might cut it in half, but I don't want to skip anything. All right, so what we just talked about is, in the last passage, he said, shake off the dust, and if they're not accepting you. Then he says, he kind of goes into a deeper, wider level here. And then he says, behold, I send you forth as, and he names 4 types of animals here. He says, I'm going to send you forth. There's that send again, apostles. He's still in this long discourse, this long speech. And he says, now I'm going to send you forth, and I want you to be aware of this. You're going to be like sheep among wolves. Wait a minute. Does that remind you of sheep that he talked about earlier? He said a few verses before that I'm sending you to the lost sheep of Israel. Then he says, now I'm going to send you as sheep. They're sheep too. Everyone's like sheep. Like sheep. We're not bad sheep, really. We don't eat grass and things like that. But anyway, there's a good thing there. Now, he says, I'm sending you forth as sheep among wolves. And I think they needed to know this. Sheep, who wins between a sheep, little sheep here, hopefully you can see that pretty good there, among wolves. Okay, who's going to win in a battle? The wolf does, right? He says, you're going to go sheep among wolves, plural. There's going to be really mean people that oppose the message that you're saying. And maybe some of the Pharisees or maybe other people. And he's saying, you're going to be out there and there's going to be hostile people that don't like you and hate you and everything else. And they're going to try and eat you up. They're ravenous and they're delicious. I'm sorry. There we go. But get off of my eyes. Get off. No, I'm just teasing. But here's sheep and wolves. So wolves and sheep, like sheep are defenseless and all that. The difference, though, by the way, in the animal kingdom, wolves are more powerful. In God's kingdom, sheep are more powerful than the wolves. Good always wins eventually over evil. It really does. And so Jesus Christ is going to be with them. And we'll see what he says a little bit later in this passage about that. But he's warning them. But as soon as he mentions sheep and wolves, he mentions two other creatures. One of them is be wise as serpents. Okay? Now, the Bible has a lot to say about serpents. As a matter of fact, the word serpent plus serpents, some of them are plural, are mentioned 49 times in the whole Bible, just over and over and over. Most of the time, it's about the devil himself. In chapter 3, it says he's a serpent. Well, first it talks about there's a crafty animal in the Garden of Eden, crafty meaning subtle and slick and all that. He says the serpent. And then the devil took on that title for himself later where he's called the devil, the serpent, that old serpent in Revelation chapter 12 and all. So, and there's a lot of other times. But you know what? There are some things that are pretty good about snakes. By the way, most humans don't like snakes. You know, it's something about it as a negative connotation. It's kind of, you know, creepy and their tongue going out, licking the ground and all. They're licking with their sensory thing. But anyway, so, but this time Jesus actually pulled something off that's positive. As a matter of fact, it's not the only time it's positive. In Proverbs chapter 30, I think it's verse 19, it talks about four things are really amazing and wonderful. And it's the way of a snake or serpent on a rock. I guess just how it moves. I mean, they don't have any, they don't have any limbs. They don't have, they have bones, but it's just, they're real slick. Jesus said, be wise as serpents, be slick as serpents. Which means, you know, you need to go out there like sheep, but also you need to have you need to be a wise sheep and be kind of like a snake, slick, where, you know, it's hard to catch a snake. There's, you know, so you need to be aware of what you're going into when you're talking to people, and you need to be able to get out, or you need to avoid. He's saying, don't get into big issues that don't need to be. Now, the fact is, we need to confront evil. If you're just back here like a little lamb, you don't do anything, you're not going in there and trying to stop the evil, and then the kingdom of God is not confronting the kingdom of Satan. And good needs to attack evil, not attack with physically and all. But that's why he goes on and says, well, you need to be wise as a serpent, but you don't need to be poisonous, you know, like a serpent. You need to be harmless as a dove, a beautiful dove. There's so many symbols of the word dove. That's also used quite a bit. But the word harmless, actually, good words that it really means is being innocent as a dove. Guileless, like not deceptive, don't be fake. Also pure as a dove. There's a purity. It's a symbol of a pureness that you need to have. Sincere. And so you need to be harmless, and like you're not trying to cause trouble when you're sharing the gospel and things like that. Although it does cause trouble to the enemy, and the enemy causes people to not like you, and then now you're back to the wolves. All right, so that's kind of some interesting stuff. And then he says, but then he switches from animals to men. He says, so be aware, beware and be aware. Beware of men. So what they're going to do is they're going to take you up in their synagogues, the Jewish church here. He says, I'll read it, but beware of men, for they will deliver you up to the councils. And I'd like to explain that just for a second. He said, councils, what's he talking about? The word council is referring to the Sanhedrin, or Sanhedrin. I prefer Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin probably is, I haven't looked up the Greek pronunciation, but Sanhedrin. Okay, now we'll get into that more as we go, but there's more than one. Now there's a Supreme Sanhedrin, which is like 70 to 72. We'll study that later. It's like the Supreme Court. It's the big court of the land. They're judges and such. And then that's the big one. That's the supreme one, the big Sanhedrin. And that's in Jerusalem, Judea. But then all over Galilee and all over Israel, they had these smaller ones. They're councils. These are men who are like court people in the synagogues, kind of helping to bring certain cases, court cases, to know what's right from wrong. And like someone has a dispute, an argument, they don't know how to solve it. They come to court and they have to solve it. So they had a lot of councils. For let's say this is a village here of this area here in this city, and let's if it's 120 or more, if there's 120 people in that town or more, it could be 200, 500, 700, 1,200, 1,000, a bunch of people. Then there were 23 judges on the Sanhedrin. Okay, 23 of them on that town. If there was less than 120, let's say this town right here had 70 people, 75 people or something in that town, then it would be 3 members, 3 men on the judges. So there's 23 judges or 3, depending on how many. That's how they did. Now, by the way, another writer named Josephus, we'll mention him as we go. He's a Jewish writer, which is a historian. He wrote a bunch of stuff. He also said that, I don't know if it's certain cases or certain times, or maybe there's a disagreement on this. He said there were 7 judges. By the way, in our Supreme Court in the Americas, we have 9 and all. But all right, so they're going to bring you before the councils. Now, this is really interesting. Matthew says all this, but fact is, what Jesus is saying here, he's telling the apostles this, but he's really going beyond right now what they're going to be doing in Galilee outside of God. He's saying this is down the line. He's preparing them mentally. I love how God prepares people. He's prepared me all the time for things in my life. Because, see, God knows the future. And so Jesus Christ is actually telling them what's going to happen down the line. During this time when they went out, nothing like this happened. They weren't brought before councils. They weren't brought before the cities. And yet he said it's going to happen. So he brings it up here. By the way, in the synoptic, remember we have Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And Mark and Luke, they mention this. And actually, Matthew mentions this later on again. But in Mark 6, he mentions it, this thing about going out. But he never mentions this part. Luke 21, he does bring it out. And he never mentions this councils thing. Like they didn't say all this, but in Matthew it's brought out. So I love how we have different gospel writers. You put it all together, you get a lot of knowledge and understanding. But Jesus was preparing them ahead of time. Or it's also possible that Matthew, he a lot of times brings, remember like in Matthew 8 and 9, all these miracles that happen over and over and over. Those happen at different times. He kind of compiles it. So he may have just put all this together, not only for the history of what Jesus said, but sometimes he put it into this passage, which maybe he didn't say it right at that time, but it's for the, the Jewish community of Christians that he's talking to, and they also need to be prepared. But anyway, Jesus did prepare the apostles for that. And this actually happened big time, in the synagogues. Paul, for example, I mentioned, I didn't mention, he mentions that you're going to get flogged. What's flogged? Or scourged? You know what it is? It's a whipping. Now, actually, it's in reference to a passage in Deuteronomy. If someone's really doing evil, then there's, sometimes they gave them a whooping in their backs and all. They sure changed them, that's for sure. You didn't want to whoop it. Even human adults, like a spanking or something, they got whooped. And it actually says in the Bible in the Old Testament days, not for nowadays, but it is for the Old Testament days. And when we get into the Old Testament, I'll tell you why that is. It's going to be a long time from now. But anyway, in Deuteronomy, it said to, I think, what is it? Deuteronomy verse 3 of I can't remember which chapter. Anyway, it says 40 times. Now, it's 40 or less. It could be 10 or it could be 20. But let's say you really did something really, really bad. You really hurt someone or damaged someone or something. Now, there's the rabbis have written 168 times. No, 168 things, a list of things that you should get scourged for or whooped. Well, Jesus said, that the apostles are going to be brought up into councils who are going to get flogged. By the way, Paul he mentions it later. I think it's in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. And he said that he's going to, he had 5 times, he had 40 stripes, 195 times. He had 195 if you count it out. Now, the rabbis, the Jewish people, or the judges decided, well, we don't want to disobey God and go past 40, so they always counted to 39. And just in case if they miscounted, they don't want to go 41 and do too many. So they always did 39. The way they did it is they took, it's kind of sad. This is kind of rough telling you all this, but it's true. They took something of usually ox's hide, an ox in its skin, its hide. And they usually did, like, they took 3 of them. Sometimes there was a different, Romans have cat of 9 tails. We'll talk about that when we get to the flogging of Jesus. Jesus got whooped, by the way. But like 3 of them, like this. And they would, and they counted so many times. 26 times on the back and 13 times on the chest. How about that? They had to turn over. In the beginning, they had to lie down on their stomach, you know, and that's how they used to do it. Then they changed and they took a small statured pole or post, and they would tie the person on the post, and the guy had to lean over, either over the post or over like this, so it was easier to get their back. Sorry, you know, the back of the chest. They also stood upon a stone, so they had even more power behind it. And you know what? In the writings that I've read, they were told to hit as hard as they could. You know, it's kind of really rough. Glad we're not living in those times. Although, if you were living in those times, would you deserve a spanking? Do you deserve whoopings from your parents? Are you living good? Think about it. Now, the other thing, which, you know, I think spankings are biblical. It's okay, but so even adults got it, because if they're acting childish and they're acting really mean. Now, they actually tied things on the bottom too. Everything from iron a little bit, or stones, and, you know, kind of sharp things and all that. And that would, you know, hurt them even more. All right. But anyway, so what they would do is take 3 of them, these 3 straps, we'll call it, and they would count 13 times, and you've got your 39, right? 13 times 3 equals 39. So go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Ow! I guess you won't sin anymore. You won't do that wrong error, that bad thing. So it was kind of tough. By the way, I know a story of that happened in our age, in our modern times, where a guy in Singapore, across the world, he took a spray and he vandalized. He sprayed on property, and he got caught. And they caned him. They took something and they, you know, hit him over. Like, that's how they did it. And there was such an outrage in America. Like, why are you doing that? How could you do that? And the guy, I remember hearing on the radio, he got up, he spoke on the radio, and he spoke on the mic, and he said, as a report, like, you check your crime rate, America. Look at your crime rate, America, and look at ours. And that's all I have to say. And he walked off, meaning we don't have much crime going on, because in America, a lot of times it's a lot of, everyone's so easy on crime, or a lot of this stuff. Anyway, I'm sorry I got into all that, but it's kind of interesting thoughts here. So, so he said, all right, I'm sending you out like sheep among wolves. And then he says, be wise as serpents, harmless as doves. But be on your guard against men. He said, be careful and be aware of them. They will hand you over to the local councils, these synagogues and all. And a lot of times they didn't do it right in a synagogue. It was a room attached to the synagogue. It used to be done in the marketplaces, by the way. And then he says, then he goes on and goes beyond that. He says, on my account, for my sake, you're going to be brought before governors and kings. What? Like, now that didn't happen during this time. So again, Jesus is showing them ahead of time and preparing them mentally. And that's exactly what happened. If you look through the book of Acts, they were brought well, even before then, Jesus was brought before Herod, a king, or a client king. We'll talk about that later. And also a governor, Pilate, you know. He was only one Pilate, so he says governors. So in other words, it's talking about the future church. And this is like projected for us, by the way. Even nowadays, people are brought to prison, going to court in other parts of the country for being Christians, and maybe even here some. So he said, you're going to be brought before governors and kings. And he says, don't worry about it. What? How are you not going to worry about it? He says, don't worry about what you're going to say. As a matter of fact, Luke says later, by the way, in his passage when you get to it, don't even settle it now, that you're not going to even meditate. You're not going to even think about what you're going to say. Do not worry. Why? because you will have how to say it and what to say. I like that, how and what. Don't even worry about it. Take no thought about it. Like, don't give a thought about it. Just go there. You just pray and seek God. Be close to God all the time, and you'll know what to say and what to do. And then in the Spirit of your Father, I love this. Now, Matthew doesn't talk about the Holy Spirit a whole lot in his scriptures. He did say it a couple times. You know, he mentioned about the baptism. You'll be baptized in the Spirit. Then he says it here. Then we'll get in Matthew 12. He mentions it there. But Luke does a lot, by the way. But here's the thing. He said, the Spirit of your Father will give you what you need to say at that hour, at that very time. So much to learn from these wonderful words of Jesus. It's also cool to look back at these guys and how they bravely and courageously went out and shared the gospel of the kingdom. And they worked with people, and they did all that they were supposed to do in these passages. So very cool. All right, well, there you go. Hope you're getting something out of it. I'll try and shut it down right now because I'll keep talking. I want to shut my mind down and not think about it anymore. I hope you think about it afterwards. So God bless you.